This is the Art of Darkness podcast with Kevin Kautzman
and Brad Kelly. We're a couple of very online writers interested in the dark side of what drives creative people to create against all odds.
This show is about art and the people who make it, what it costs them, and what it takes to bring something unique and impactful into the world.
Each episode, we excavate the life and work of an artist you might think you know.
Don't worry, they're all safely dead.
On every episode, we try and find out just what the hell was wrong with them and how they worked through their darkness to create something that lives on after them and continues to move culture.
Find us online at artofdarkpod.com and on Twitter at artofdarkpod. All right, we've got some sponsors for the pod now.
Wait, what?
Every link you need for the things we talk about here is at artofdarkpod.com/sponsors. First up, books.
If you're into this podcast, odds are you're probably a reader. We've got links to buy new books from bookshop.org and used books from alibris.com.
And if you want to listen to your books, we recommend and use audible.com.
It's great, and the catalog is huge.
All right. So if you're listening to this, you are online.
Maybe you're very online.
You probably have a website or are thinking of starting one. Maybe you want a website like artofdarkpod.com. We built that with WordPress, which is by far the most popular way to create websites. And the single best host for serious WordPress is WP Engine. I've personally used them for over a decade now, and I don't host my websites anywhere else. Go to artofdarkpod.com/sponsors and click on the WP Engine link to learn more.
Finally, the best way to support the show is at patreon.com/artofdarkpod. Get the bonus After Dark content for every episode, access to the book club, and more.
Thanks for supporting Art of Darkness. And I don't think that was too painful. I think we did a pretty good job there.
Yeah, that sounded good.
Yeah, we appreciate it.
Back in the dark room, talking more David Foster Wallace. The people like David Foster Wallace content anyway, so we are bringing more to you again. We have with us, as we always do in the dark room, somebody who knows our subject a little better, a little different than us, and that is the great Adam Lehrer. Adam, I kind of like took a couple notes trying to think of how to describe you, and it's like every time I check in on you, there's some other huge new project.
I'm a polymath.
You are a polymath. It's true, man.
Yeah.
I mean, the most recent thing I saw was this conceptual rock and roll album under the name Botched Chatification. The album called Masculinity Under Threat. People check this out. It is. I haven't gotten my way through the whole thing, but I was like, holy shit, this is.
Well, that's what's really cool about it is like I have this concept for a band, just like, screaming about failed masculinity and like body dysmorphia in men. All because I think this is like really funny topics. Like we talk about this with women, but men are hit with just as many images of like what they're supposed to look like these days.
Dude, I grew up with little action figures that were yoked. You know what I mean?
I know.
6 years old, I'm like, this is what a man's supposed to look like.
Yeah. And everybody has like on one hand really unrealistic expectations of what like beauty is, but also in the second hand they're like so far away from even achieving just like a normal level of like health or fitness. It's like there's such a gap. Most of these people, we have like just these two extremes in American life. Anyway, 100%. I wrote the lyrics. All the songs are really funny and certainly fit into my like project. One song is about Dylan Roof getting buccal fat removal and how that could have saved him. There's another song about Knight Landsman, the art forum publisher, who's like this really bizarre. He looks kind of like a magic elf, but he was like a 30-year long sexual harasser and rapist.
Oh my God.
I mean, who knows? Like he might have just been like a perverted, weird guy, and then millennials started getting hired at art forum, and like his harmless ribbing became internalized a different way, but it's still just a hilarious image because apparently he used to take girls to lunch and he'd be like bright red suit, like weird fucking elvish looking face, 5'3", and he'd be like, your boyfriend got a big fucking cock. Does he fuck you good with that cock? So we wrote something about him.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. And everybody's just, their gears are grinding and going, wait, this guy must have something going on. If he's talking to me like that, he must know somebody, or
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, Artform was a way better magazine under his reign of terror, but yeah. We were just writing about men and just like the shit men go with, and then what became even better is the songs turned out like really good and anthemic and like loud and heavy.
Yeah.
And like, the way we made that thing is like I was finishing my new book and I was just like looking for a distraction. So on Saturdays, my dog was sick. There was so much ugly shit happening around here. So just on Saturdays, like I'd go to Beanstalk's house and he'd already have the music ready. I would just like scream my fucking head off until the neighbors started yelling at us. And then we'd go shopping when we finished.
Okay.
And we did that for like a month and a half. And then we had the record. And now we're like, dude, it's insane. It's so easy to psyop people when you have like a little bit of a platform. There's a gallery in Australia who already asked us to do like a music video for an exhibition they're doing.
Okay.
We've been offered to do shows. Like, it would be fucking retarded if all the work that I've put in over the last few years, putting in these like massive books, endless body of work, and the thing that makes me astronomically famous are these like full hard songs about art form rapists that took me cumulative like 3 hours to make.
Yeah. Right. Dude. Yeah.
Hey, listen, I am just trying to fit in that GIF. Right. You got to come to the level, come to where people are at.
Yeah, that's right. That's true. So you got botch chatification happening. You just said you've just finished your book. Is that the conceptual manifesto for psychological warfare, or are you talking about another book?
That one's been done. Yeah.
Okay.
I finished that one like a year ago. This is like a long novel.
Okay.
That I've been working for about 3 years.
Right on. Well, we will look forward to that. What's that? Does that have a title?
True Faith is the title. That I think I can announce that. Yeah, fuck it.
Okay.
You guys got the first announcement.
All right. Yeah, look at that. Awesome. Yeah, so you've got those things going on. You've got your podcast, System of Systems. You've got the safety propaganda. To Substack, right?
Yep.
Substack and a record label now.
Yes. Yeah. Look at you, man. That's awesome. That's awesome. Just killing it.
Elite bodybuilder.
Yeah. Just that you literally are a polymath, dude. That's awesome. Well, let's kind of talk about David Foster Wallace, at least some here. One thing I had, you have this concept that you have sort of shown examples of in your on safety propaganda, the notion of crypto transgression.
Yeah.
And I was curious, and I do want to get to, you have a great piece about David Foster Wallace, postmodern suicide. I do want to talk about that. But first, I'm fascinated with this concept of crypto transgression, and I'm wondering if you can explain it. And then can you tell us, is there any crypto transgression in David Foster Wallace's work?
To explain it, crypto transgression is basically a recognition of systems of censorship and control, but a way of subverting them by sort of encrypting and injecting naughty or transgressive themes into sort of like a place where they don't belong, in a way that counter signals the broader ideology of the thing that it becomes embedded in, and also works in a way where it's like, if you don't know what you're looking at, it's going to go over your head, but you can sort of, it becomes like a kind of encrypted communication amongst the real heads or whatever. And to answer the second question, abso-fucking-lutely, David Foster Wallace is like an amazing perfect example of it, because the guy was absolutely considered to be at the peak of what we can call New Yorker approved mainstream literature. I mean, the motherfucker was on the Rolling Stone hot list, and I mean, he was huge. Like, I don't even know if people really remember this, but he was like a pop culture celebrity at a certain point. And yet at the same fucking time, very few guys in the 90s, well, no one at his level, really, at his level of like literary importance and broader cultural awareness, was that fucking weird. And in many ways, very avant-garde. So,
yeah, he was weird. He was cool, but he was critically accepted. He was popularly accepted.
Yeah.
Like, he kind of hit all of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, he's getting published all the time in Harper's and in all the really well-respected places. But at the same time, like, if you like, Dennis Cooper and Burroughs and that kind of stuff, you can absolutely make a case that David Foster Wallace is kind of be of your taste too.
Amen.
And
yeah,
for me, like, I think he was the first writer that I sort of discovered in a like personal, organic, though I hate that word, kind of way. Like, I remember reading about my uncle, my gay uncle, who was like my cool uncle, who was always like, sending me records and shit like that. He got me like a subscription to Spin magazine when I was really young. And I remember reading about David Foster Wallace in an article on Spin. And I was like, this guy sounds cool, but I didn't pick up Infinite Jest until I was in high school. And Infinite Jest had all these weird personal associations with me because I had just gotten a scholarship to go to the University of Arizona for track, which is where Hal in the fucking book goes for tennis. And the private school where Hal first started smoking weed is based on Tabor Academy, which is where my brother went.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it was like, and I was also like an elite athlete who was also a total drug addict. Like, there was all this personal associations I made with the book. It took me a long time to read it. And I think that's how you're supposed to read it. I think it is a book that you might crank through the first 100 pages, put it down, and then go. But it's almost like he created a book, like a postmodern a work of postmodern literature that's almost like the Bible, where you come back to it at different points in your fucking life. It's like this gigantic, endless thing that you'll never really pick up all the detail on first read.
Yeah, I remember doing the research for the core episode. In his sort of early correspondences about Infinite Jest with his editor, David Foster Wallace says something like, I didn't realize you weren't supposed to write something meant to be read twice. Like, he's like, I thought that was a completely realistic expectation that people would read it twice. And, it isn't. From a marketing standpoint, it's not a reasonable expectation.
I love his ego too. Like, because there's so many fucking books out there. Like, I have 1,000 books on my shelf right here that I guarantee I'll never fucking read.
Yep.
And he's like, no, I made this gigantic thing that you have to read at least twice,
Well, yeah, there is a certain ego, and he's like a young man at that point. I mean, he'd had up to Infinite Jest, he'd had a career that a lot of writers would envy, but he still was young. He had a lot further to go before he'd have anything like what he would call success. And yet to just throw that out there, like, chew on this. And then for it to sell hundreds of thousands of copies, there's like nobody in the world who would have predicted that, I don't think.
No.
Yeah. I was curious about, there's a lot of influences, and there's a lot of talk about like influence of Pynchon and various postmodern writers. I was curious, and I'm just kind of guessing here, but I think this is in your wheelhouse. What do you make of the influence of Bret Easton Ellis on David Foster Wallace? How does their Venn diagram line up?
Well, I know, like, DFW was very open about how much he loved Less Than Zero. which makes sense. He would have probably been just a little bit younger than Brett was. And you know, I think you can see that to an extent. It's just you know, certain Gen X sensibility is there, a certain focus on youth, on addiction, on disconnect, on alienation. But at the same time, their ambition is ultimately very different. Brett, you know, is very, you know, what Brett says he reveres is neutrality, you know, a chilly remove and distance from the work. I don't think, you know, David Foster Wallace is kind of like the perennial sigma beta kind of hybrid. I don't think he was capable of distancing himself.
No.
Yeah. I mean,
think that's
go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, I mean, that kind of carries us into this great essay you have on David Foster Wallace. I don't know if I've got the title. Postmodern Suicide. Is that what it's called? Yeah. Yeah, and that's on your site. People do go check it out. It's an excellent piece of writing, as I have come to expect from Mr. Lehrer. You kind of connect him. It's mostly about David Foster Wallace, but you kind of connect him to the artist Mike Kelly and then Mark Fisher, who
there's a second part that I didn't send you guys that I get into that to that.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, you kind of make this case, and so, correct me if I'm wrong, I guess you're sort of making this case that based on David Foster Wallace's sort of his sensibility, kind of the project he'd chosen for himself, that there's a certain inevitability to the way it ended.
Yeah.
Can you kind of talk about that a little bit? What is a postmodern suicide?
Well, to me, it was very interesting that these guys who were all sort of like responsible for creating, but also complaining about the postmodern disposition, and really sort of accurately identifying what postmodernism was, in relation, especially in relation to the modernism that came before, sort of an absence of belief, an absence of hope for the future, an absence of forward thinking, all these things, and a sort of opening the floodgates to entertainment and using entertainment to wash out alienation. All these guys were talking about it. And yet they all fucking killed themselves within like the same 5 years. I couldn't help but find some sort of poignancy or meaning in that. And, you know, I think the thing with, you know, David has so much contradiction in his work. You know, on one hand, he is saying, I long for meaning. I don't believe in irony. I long for sentiment. It's almost like he's, you know, at war with the own medication that he's taking. Like, I want to feel again, and yet I can't. And then at the same time, his work is loaded with fucking irony and cruelty. And like, you know, one of the essay,
it's not sentimental. His work isn't. It's completely unsentimental. Maybe not completely, but almost entirely unsentimental.
He has sympathy for the characters, but he also fully encourages us to laugh and make fun of them. Right. I mean, a great example, I think, is that essay where he's at the fair. And David Samuels, who was a teacher of mine, I think he's the editor of Tablet now, but he pointed this out to me that about halfway through the essay, David starts like writing in the style of their speak. Like he calls it like the doggone like hot dog or some shit like that. And he's fully having a joke, like being the cool, rich, urban liberal, you know, shitting on these people and their sort of small-timey pastimes. But at this, you know, and he's also saying they're experiencing life, you know, and sentiment without the critical disposition of the postmodern ironist. So the thing that he reveres is right in front of him, but the supremely educated dick that he was still comes to the surface. There's this constant tug of war in his sensibilities. Like, he can never truly decide what he is.
Well, I mean, that reflects on what we came to sort of understand was his religion, which is television.
Yeah, exactly.
It's perfect reflection of that.
Yeah. And that there is a tragic, I mean, this is maybe, I think in my early phases of reading, you know, I had what is almost cliche, a period of, you know, just absorbing all the David Foster Wallace material I could. I mean, this is 2003, 2002, something like that. And I don't even think I recognized that tension yet. But now that I'm like kind of going back to this material and doing these episodes, I actually I feel like I'm relating to it in a totally different way, because I feel honestly some level of that tension too. Just like, you know I could find some more kind of momentary, sentimental, intimate meaning in my life if I could just somehow delete all of the shit that I've downloaded into my brain over the last 20 or 30 years, right? But I can't. It's all fucking in there.
If you could, would you push that button, Brad?
Right. That's a good, right?
I mean, Adam, if you could just wipe out like all your experiences of like the internet, let's say, with a button, would you do it? Yeah.
I would love to be someone who like knew one band that I really loved and devoted my life to. Instead, I know like 60,000 fucking records and however, like bits and pieces of everything.
Right. And then as a writer too, and maybe Adam, this isn't like this for you, but it's like this for me. It's like half the time when I'm consuming this stuff, I'm not even sure if I'm like actually like enjoying it or experiencing it anywhere close to what it's supposed to be, or if I'm just like thinking about what my opinion is about it the whole time. Right.
Yeah.
It's like, like I'm watching all these Tarkovsky movies, and most of them for the second time to prepare for an upcoming episode, and they're fucking beautiful. And at the same time, I'm like taking notes. I'm like, this is not how I'm supposed to watch this, right? Like,
I'll do you one better. I take quotes down into my notes app so I can steal it later on. I'm like consciously reading things just so I can steal it and pretend that I came up with it. Or not pretend. I'm
right, but like use it. Yeah,
it's a pastiche. It's
right. I like collaging.
Well, you're in good company with David Foster Wallace. His early story, the one that's basically an episode of Jeopardy. He basically stole all of that dialogue from like a talk. I think it was an episode of the Tonight Show or something, right? He actually almost got into legal trouble for it. So you're in good company, I think.
Which is crazy, because now that's like such an accepted practice, you know, and an important sort of literary technique, you know. We use our direct experiences all the time. Like I'm really nervous about one chapter in my book because it is entirely one-to-one an experience of my parents, and I've never even brought this up with them as an adult, so I'm like freaking out about them seeing it. But that's like a thing that we accept already, that we use our own experiences. But we're living in fucking late modernity digital world. Part of our experience is just the shit that we consume.
Right. You know, and so to not use it, you're like almost like selling yourself short or something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I applaud, you know, David for sort of making some of these devices accepted on like a higher literary scale. It had to be somebody.
For sure. Can I read it?
I listened to the episode you guys did with Astro.
Yeah, Astro.
Yeah. And there was some talk about whether he was a genius or not. I am of the extreme opinion that he was 100% like an insane level genius.
I'm around to that point, and I'm even sympathetic to people who like pick up Infinite Jest or whatever and are like, it's not for me.
which is fine. Yeah.
Whatever. But yeah, I think clearly you're dealing with some high octane, 180 IQ kind of dude here for sure. I think it's hard to say otherwise.
Yeah,
I don't think
I wouldn't contest that. I'm not going to play devil, Can I read? Can I read a little bit of, because I thought the postmodern suicide essay was great and it really coalesced things. I just want to read like a little bit of it and then maybe we can talk about it. I think it'll generate some conversation.
Yeah.
All right. You start with a quote from David Foster Wallace. I think there must be probably different types of suicides, writes Wallace in Infinite Jest. I'm not one of the self-hating ones. And then this continues in your voice. The postmodern suicide is distinct in the sense that it is not a suicide of self-obsession. It cannot be dismissed or judged as the kind of weakness we might have historically projected onto suicide victims. Wallace continues, I just wanted out. I didn't want to play anymore is all. The postmodern suicide then is a rational response to the contemporary conditions of the unsociety. Wallace, Kelly, and Fisher all unearthed the essential, tragic, and related truths about the unsociety. It was through their strength of thought and spirit that these thinkers were able to make these observations. Thus, postmodern suicides are at face imbued with a cosmic power that those who continue to live can't access. But is the postmodern suicide short-sighted, even if a rational response to the schizoid contradictions of the decaying unsociety? That's where things get more complicated. I love that whole thing, but I'm really into this part, a rational response to the schizoid contradictions of the decaying unsociety. I think I know what unsociety is. What is unsociety?
The way I was kind of thinking about it is that sort of the Baudrillardian simulacra thing, in that we all sort of know in some sense that we're living in an era past politics, past governance. I actually Instagrammed something about this today. I called it like my revised political position, which is basically everything I've said to you guys that has made you think I know what I'm talking about was a lie. I'm a fucking blowhard. I talk out of my ass and I amuse myself. Because in reality, I think to even think like that we have a possibility of changing our world in any way is a falsity, because it's all on its own logic now. No one is steering this ship. Maybe Elon Musk can get a grip on it, but we'll have to see.
That is sort of the black pill, right? I mean, I tend to think like the whole conspiracy theory world, and there's plenty of that stuff that I think is credible, or at least worth thinking about. But I think there is a certain sense where like the black pill past that is like, no, man, nobody's running it. This whole thing is just it's an algorithm. Somebody put an algorithm in place in the past, and this thing is just running. Like,
by every economic measure, our economy should have tanked in the last couple of years.
It's completely artificial. It doesn't make any sense.
They just keep printing money when they started to realize that if you have like the world's mightiest military, you don't really need to have economic stability.
Yeah,
right.
And not just the military, but the will to embroil yourselves and shed blood and print money indefinitely for 20 years and then just to leave, just to bounce.
Right.
Yeah.
It's absolutely insane.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. This is sort of off topic, but I was sure that, us pummeling money into the conflict in Ukraine was going to have some was going to backfire. And what happened? Fucking the whole EU is now a client state of the United States of America.
Right.
I don't fucking get it. Maybe the fucking ghouls know what they're doing. I mean, sure, they're evil, but like they just know they're gonna win.
I mean, the white pill on that is at least they're competent. Somebody up there actually is maybe somehow, even if sinister and nefarious.
That's the sort of frightening thing to think, is that you can point at U.S. foreign policy, and this isn't a political podcast per se, but of course everything's post-political, so maybe it is a political podcast. But I mean, what if they're getting what they wanted? What if the foreign policy and the adventuring in the Middle East turned out exactly the way they wanted? That's a very interesting thought experiment.
Yeah, and I think there's a large chance that that's true.
Certainly some people got what they wanted out of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
well, and even if it's a failure in terms of goals, what are goals anymore, right? In this sort of post reality world, it keeps the machine going. The logic of the machine itself is what drives it.
Yeah. 100%.
So here we are.
Oh.
Times. I like this. I really admire this piece of writing, Adam, and the phrase unsociety hits me. I've been trying to concoct my own neologism or way of describing it, but I might adopt that because we don't it just we don't have a society as far as I can tell. You know, you can catch it in bits and bobs and you form your little subcultures, and maybe you have you do a little theater company, you have a band and you coalesce briefly, but it doesn't, the pieces no longer fit.
It certainly feels that way, doesn't it? It definitely feels like there's something has been, and maybe it was never there, but man, it seems like we used to have something more approaching a certain kind of stability or cohesiveness, or even just that stuff just made more sense. Now it seems almost impossible to. This is interesting. I want to tie this to a little bit, and maybe it's a bad segue, but who cares? Adam, when we were leading up to this, was sort of like, well, what are we going to talk about? And I'm glad you wanted to talk about I hate the phrase nonfiction, but whatever. These pieces that David Foster Wallace was writing for various magazines, including the State Fair piece, the famous cruise ship piece. And then you hipped me to the John McCain piece, which I'd never read before. And
we got to correct ourselves on.
I was just going to say, in the core episode, I think we said that essay was written for the 2008 election, but it was actually the 2000 election, which makes it like ancient history at this point, right? And I read that and was sort of fascinated and trying to get my head around what was so compelling about it. I mean, part of the thing was it was just a time capsule, because you go back to the year 2000, and there's a lot in the article about kind of how it's all fake, how it's, he's talking to these audiences, but McCain is really talking to the media and trying to figure out, like, is McCain the real deal, or is it all an act? And at what point can you be the real deal and it turns into an act on its own sort of momentum? And reading it, I was thinking, it was like, things are so much faker now than they were 23 years ago. Yeah.
But I think there's also a big joke in that essay. He opens it with sort of this excoriation of political marketing and theatrics, and then goes on to demonstrate exactly how someone becomes seduced by marketing and theatrics.
By himself basically being seduced, or almost being seduced.
Himself, yeah. Absolutely. I mean, and it comes down to the fact that, like, the best lie always starts with the grain of truth. John McCain, no one can read John McCain's biography and not be somewhat impressed. The man legitimately was a fucking soldier who survived 5 years of torture and starvation. So even if you know the guy's an absolute fucking hack and an absolute demon on par with the worst in American government, you still have trouble squaring that with the fact that he was once a young man, full of ideals, full of courage, full of strength.
Right. Who is a legit hero? Like, in that, like, standing by your code no matter what, like, old-fashioned American sense, something that almost anybody could be proud of,
Yes.
And then and that part when he was detailing what John McCain went through, getting shot down, breaking all kinds of bones. They were gonna let him out, and he basically said, "No, I'm not getting let out till the people who were in here before me get let out." And so then they beat him up again, and it's just this, to the end of his life, he can't pick his arms up over his head. It's just this horrific
all real
hellish
shit.
scenario he lives through. Yeah.
And but that is how politics in the young society functions. It has to start with something.
Well,
and Barack Obama, a hack, but come on, we're all fucking liberal men of a certain age, and we're all going to be like, wow, I can't believe a black guy made it this fucking far in politics.
Right.
It's still something legitimately impressive.
I mean, I remember that election very well, and I remember DFW politics at the time, and there was an incredible subtext. I think it was even the context was like, we can get this guy in here now. This is the shot, because Hillary botched the Iraq vote. He won on that Iraq vote, as far as I can tell, because people were so outraged. Getting back to McCain, how much of it is the desire for that generation of Americans on the right to salvage something respectable out of Vietnam?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
And to make meaning of it.
Right.
It happened for a reason, maybe, possibly, hopefully.
Yeah. Yeah, if he could have given birth to this redemptive hero, then maybe it is somehow worth it in some, on some level, for sure. But then the cynical side is that you take that grain of truth, and then that gets commodified and like processed down into its basic units, and then gets used to sort of sell this guy's campaign.
Well,
exactly. And McCain wasn't really saying, it's not like McCain was out there telling war stories, but it was always sort of like John McCain, who, by the way, is a war hero.
Vietnam, I mean, what the candidate did during Vietnam was on the ballot in every presidential election up until, I think, when Obama ran. That was the first time when it was like, it was sort of not as much of an issue for both of the candidates. But prior to that, it was always...
I mean, I think this essay, Wallace's piece actually makes a good argument that it should have been part of the conversation.
I'm not saying it shouldn't have been, but it's just a big fact. It was a big factor.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just fascinating too, because like someone who's been through war, the stance you would want them to logically take is a stance that is like preventative of more.
We should avoid this
same fucking thing. That was never McCain's deal. It was always about like, he went through the worst horror that war has to offer, but he still spent his kind of career with the valorous bullshit conception of what war is. Which went on to justify even bigger foreign policy disasters than Vietnam.
Well, and now reattaching it to the current state of media, we have snuff films out of Ukraine on the timeline.
Oh God,
daily.
Constantly.
Just unreal.
Yeah, sometimes with soundtracks.
Right.
So weird. So weird to see.
I mean, the Azov Battalion, they never knew like a Jewish virgin who they didn't like to fucking crucify and hang up in public naked, now did they?
Oh man, yeah.
Yikes!
It's hardcore.
Yeah. Well, this makes me my taxpayers are going to these fucking sadistic psycho thugs in the fucking
it's great. Europe. Fighting for freedom. Yeah.
I was talking about this with my friend recently. I was like, of course, when everyone's a fascist, but when we like support a fascist, it can't even be like the cool ones, like at least the early fascists, they were like artists and designers and philosophers. We got to give our money to these like low IQ skinhead fucking baboons who only live for like death and mayhem, and like most can't even read.
Right.
Wait, you were talking, what was it you were talking about earlier? Crypto
transgression.
Transgression. Let's talk more about crypto transgression.
Yeah.
This is the Art of Darkness podcast, artofdarkpod.com. Brad, what are we going to talk about on the After Dark for Patreon?
This is what, and I'll just float this to you guys, and you tell me if this is something worth talking about. I'm reading Adam's great essay about postmodern suicide, and I'm thinking about me, and I'm thinking about you, Kevin, and I'm thinking about Adam to the extent that I know Adam, and I'm thinking, this all sounds right, but why haven't any of the three of us killed ourselves? And so I want to talk about this maybe on the After Dark. Why have we survived? If this is all the truth, because I think this article is like spot on, and yet, so I think we want to talk about that a little bit in the After Dark.
That is a very dark After Dark topic. I'm looking forward to that. They probably get a little bit personal. I'm willing to jump in on that, and hopefully Adam is too.
Yeah,
Adam, I was getting a lot out of our conversations. It's really very cool to have you on. I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to your new book too.
Yeah, late August, I'm hoping, is when we can get it out by.
Hey, and while we're talking about that, can sell us on the book that's already out, the Conceptual Manifesto for Psychological Warfare. Tell us a little bit about that, because it's a cool concept, and I want our audience to be familiar with it and go buy it.
Oh yeah, it's like a 200-point listicle that doubles as a 200-point work of pseudo-philosophy, I guess. And it's like, how do I describe this? It's just like 200 bullet points of historical, artistic, and philosophical concepts that illuminate what I think of as, like, when I think of the term safety propaganda. I first sort of just self-published it on Substack, and I had no intention of it being fucking 200 points, but as I am wont to do, that's what it exploded to. And then the publisher in the UK, Morbid Books, really liked it, and they're like, it's retarded that you have 200 points on a fucking Substack, so why don't we just put this in a book?
Right on.
So that was cool, because like it gave me like a book, it gave me a project in between communions and this like long novel. Mm-hmm. So now I have like 3 books instead of only 2.
Yeah. Can I read one? Can I read one of the 200 bullet points?
Yeah.
Just for the audience, so you get a sense of what he's doing with this. Number 4, neuro-linguistic programming, NLP, and its practice. British power electronics pioneers White House employed neuro-linguistic programming into their lyrics to persuade or even brainwash their listeners into certain thoughts and obsessions. And while NLP techniques have been discredited by the psychiatric community as a pseudoscience and quasi-religion, safety propaganda holds that through scientific and religious techniques, we can unbrainwash the masses, and thus we embrace NLP.
There you go.
And that felt, actually, I can't quite put my finger on it, but that felt a little David Foster Wallace-ish, with a little bit more of an edge on it, a little bit more of the safety propaganda go hard to it. But that felt like a concept I could have seen. There is something in that and Infinite Jest that I feel like overlaps.
Oh, I mean, I think he probably was interested in NLP. There's certain phrases that he used that always really got stuck in your head.
Mm-hmm.
And full circle, the Philip Best, who was once in British Power Electronics Pioneers White House, is now my publisher.
Oh, really?
And Sulfate,
Oh, okay. So I didn't know that connection. Yep. Fascinating. Yeah. Yep. Very cool.
Cool. Maybe that's why I haven't killed myself yet. It's because all my heroes are my homies now.
That's pretty cool. Right on. That's pretty cool. That's one of the advantages of living in the unsociety, is you get to sort of like recreate like partial little, that's kind of what Kevin was talking about, right? Just kind of remake these connections. Yeah, interesting. So thinking about
it's sort of about the death of authority in a lot of ways, right? I mean, that gravity that anchored us and gave us consensus reality has, I think, as we see the shape of the world play out, eroded. And I think we see more and more through the curtain and can kind of clearly see, anybody who's paying attention, you just see raw power is right there. And it's hard to maintain the appearance of like a genuine benign authority when the thuggishness is, and the mobocracy is just right there in your face, undeniably. So fun.
Once you can if and funnily enough, there a lot of that is how it manages to sort of pull itself off is some version of neuro-linguistic programming, right?
Every time. Repetition.
That's how you know when they talk about current thing, capital C, capital T. That's how you know a new current thing is because there's a new catchy phrase of some kind, right? So all of a sudden, one day everything's one way, the next day everything is a threat to democracy. Like, is it really a threat to, but everything's getting called that, right?
The COVID deployment was so obvious. Go ahead, Adam. Yeah.
And how retarded do you have to be to even like still care or think that democracy is real? It's a threat to the democracy that I have no say in whatsoever.
Right.
Yeah, absolute. Yeah, it's third grade reading level.
This is here. So here's a quote from that McCain piece on David Foster Wallace's John McCain piece that I thought was interesting, and I'm just curious what either you guys might think of this. He says, and he's not 100% serious. He unpacks this or whatever, but he says, if you are bored and disgusted by politics and don't bother to vote, you are in effect voting for the entrenched establishments of the two major parties. Is that true? I don't know. I have mixed feelings about this.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a Gen X-y sort of liberal kind of idea.
Right. Yeah, I mean, we're seeing this now too, where it's sort of like, you're just going to get the same, we're just like going to rehash the last election, apparently, is what's going to happen. And that's somehow something's going to be different or better now. Either way.
I know the Democrats are already like rolling out alternative candidates and like pretending they're mad about them when when in reality it's like electorally it makes perfect sense what they're doing. It's like, let's find this really intelligent, honest guy from a noblesse oblige old political family, because we can get back those voters who hated COVID and are maybe sick of like, black skitzed out homeless people trying to stab them every time they go to work, but are also like not so into abortion hysteria or whatnot,
right?
And it's not even that like RFK might mean what he says, but that's just like his electoral role. I mean, we're
sure, right? Yeah,
like,
I mean,
all these...
you don't. Yeah, he'll be.
Well, that's. I mean,
they'll signal boost him to the degree that it's helpful.
Yeah,
that's part of. I mean, that's part of the thesis of the McCain piece. Wallace's McCain piece is like, even if you start out authentic, say RFK he means every single word that he says, he will then get caught up in the machine and used by it for whatever ends it deems necessary, right?
Yeah.
Well, he used that phrase, entrenched interests of the two political parties or whatever. It would be, I would love if it felt like they were in a trench and entrenched. It feels like they've dug a hole through the earth now. Right. Yeah. So I think we're at a new that doesn't apply anymore. I'd be very curious what he would write if he was looking at the landscape today.
Absolutely.
It's not a trench, it's a bottomless pit at this point.
And that I think is the saddest thing about losing him and someone like, I mean, Mike Kelly would have been so important to have in the art world right now, just because he was the only guy who ever seemed to negate the retarded shit that came out of MFA programs and whatnot. And
tell us, I don't know Kelly. Can you tell us a little bit about him?
I thought he was your cousin, Red. Come on, you don't get
Kelly
together. He's not in a Kelly. It's a different.
Kelly
the other Kelly
Kelly's
group chat.
Without an E. We've been at
they
war
can
for
never
generations.
meet. Yeah, we can't get them together. Yeah.
Well, Mike Kelly is generally regarded as one of the most important artists of the late American artists of the late 20th. He has an interesting life. He was in a band in Michigan called Destroy All Monsters.
Oh, yeah. That name rings a bell for sure.
Yeah, they even played with Jim from the Stooges at one point. And they were sort of like an early example of chaotic noise rock, but definitely much more like Art Faggy than something like the Stooges. And then 3 out of 4 of its members all moved to LA to go to LACMA. That was Mike Kelly, Jim Shaw, and who was the other one? The other guy made some cool. Oh, Kerry Loren. Kerry Loren's a really cool film archivist now. Okay. Jim Shaw became an important artist in his own right, but he's also just like an irredeemable, like, don't look at this guy's recent work, like anti-Trump sort of hysteria boomer. But Mike Kelly was always of a rare kind of brilliance and like fiercely honest disposition. His work is very funny. He's done painting, but I'd say it's his film and his performance work that was probably the most important. Also, he did these huge sculptural installations where he incorporate children's stuffed animals, and the works would communicate, sort of nostalgia, loss of meaning, all these things. And then he was also a fantastic art critic, honestly one of the best art critics of his time, even though he wasn't always a super grammatically sharp writer. And I just feel like if there's anybody in the late 20th century who's a visual artist that I feel deeply influenced by, it'd be like either him or maybe Matthew Barney. But Matthew Barney's more from like a formalist standpoint, whereas Mike Kelly is like, he's literally me or whatever.
Right. Interesting. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Very cool, man. Yeah.
I'm looking at some of these, I guess, sculptures or whatever you'd call them of like the teddy bears and the stuffed animals. And yeah, I could see how this would have a pull.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And he also did these candors, they were called. They were all these like glow in the dark neon halogen recreations of Superman's home planet. Which sounds like a hokey idea, but he retched something kind of beautiful out of it. And this whole idea of just like being this supreme alien being in a world full of alienated, stupid shitbag humans. It was like a very sort of brutal artwork in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I will look for that. I'll find some of that and blast it out on the Twitter for sure. As we kind of approach the end of the free portion for people here, I wanted to ask Adam, you're working in so many disciplines, genre, whatever. Where do you feel, how would you characterize the influence of David Foster Wallace on you, or if you would at all? I mean, do you feel the weight or the influence or the gravity of David Foster Wallace when you're working on stuff?
The direct influence was definitely, he got me interested in like doing kind of journalism pieces or thinking that it might be an interesting thing to do. I used to kind of have like, honestly, like ending up a writer, even though that's what I'm most known for, it was kind of something that I was trying to avoid for a long time. Like I really wanted to be a sculptor, a photographer, one of those two things, but was limited by physical talent.
That's always a problem. That's always a problem, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of stuff I'd like to be.
Yeah. Like, I mean, I still do some of that. I mean, I have a couple artworks in a show in Norway this summer, actually.
Oh, cool.
So it's like they're
hey,
asking
cool.
me to come back now.
Yeah, that rocks.
But it was like, David Foster Wallace was this sort of like icon of literature, and then someone it was actually that teacher, David Samuels, who told me to check out his his magazine writing.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh wow, like the way he's doing this, he's not doing like straight journalism. He's almost doing this kind of like Dadaism where everything he's reporting has like a double meaning or has a meaning that cancels one meaning out, or like he's not, it's like Picasso said, art is a lie that excavates the truth. Mm-hmm. And David Foster Wallace constantly toyed with untruths, falsities.
Mm-hmm.
He did this in both fiction and nonfiction. Mm-hmm. And that to me was incredibly inspiring. And honestly, I think one of the justifying things for me when I started doing like, bland magazine work is when I realized I could do something sort of formally interesting with it. And not just him, like Lester Bangs and Grail Marcus, guys like that were important for that kind of thing too. But and then the other thing is just like he's probably the last pop literary icon we'll ever have. Mm-hmm. Everyone knows the image of him with the headband.
Yeah.
He's handsome. He's got long hair. It looks like he's important. And
yeah,
he's kind of
Franzen had his moment, but it not quite the same. And
I'm a supporter of Franzen. I think it's become a libtard pastime to sort of counter signal Franzen, even though libtards created Franzen.
Oh, they love it. They love nothing more. That's their favorite thing, is to create somebody and then bring them back down.
And I'd like any of them to write the corrections,
Sure.
It's not gonna fucking happen.
Right.
But I think there's just something about David Foster Wallace that is a bit more metaphysically rich. He has the enigma, he has the genius, he has the image, and he also is important at a time which might have, literally the end of the 20th century. The last time when people felt that the world might have meaning.
Right.
And he's sort of chronicling the collapse of meaning right before the 21st century takes off, the internet takes over the world, and no one knows how to read anymore. So he's just like, he's a fascinating historical figure. And honestly, it's become kind of weird the extent to which he's almost fallen out of fashion again.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we're going to, with you guys doing the show and some other things, I think we might come to a period where people start to reappraise him without the fucking criticism that he was like getting for so long.
Yeah,
right.
People love like the ultimate signifier of the modern world is being triggered by legitimate greatness.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
That's why that's why they love Biden.
Yeah. Exactly. Like there's nothing that just gets under people's skin than being legitimately great. It's why John Jones is the most hated fighter in the MMA. Mm-hmm. It's why whatever, people 100%, just don't.
Well, it applies. I mean, it's all Marxism, and it applies to the hate the great man theory of history, and they don't want to elevate greatness unless it ticks off certain qualifiers for them, which is all part of making history, which is their project, because they want to move the dialectic forward to the great future utopia that we all know will.
It's funny, some of the techniques that were used to try and take down his reputation, which was like, there were articles written about how insufferable people who read David Foster Wallace are. And that was supposed to be some kind of critique of David Foster Wallace. It's like,
smart people.
Yeah. I mean, what are we doing here? Yeah. Yeah. So let's kind of close it out. We're gonna come back in the After Dark. We're gonna talk about basically how the three of us have managed to survive postmodern suicide. I want to also ask Adam the question, would lifting have saved David Foster Wallace's life? I know he's got some opinions on that, but I'm curious to see. Yeah, so join us for that, patreon.com/artofdarkpod. If you sign up, you get these bonus 20 to 30 minute episodes for each episode, but you also get access to the book club, which has been a hoot so far. Basically, we read a book. You all hang out with us in the Zoom at a given time. The recording is available for Patreon supporters only. It's been a really good time. So definitely.
And Aaron Gwynn will be joining us next month for book club. He's the author of All God's Children, and without question, will include Adam's new novel in the book club next year.
True Faith, season 2.
You into it? You heard it here first.
Awesome.
True Faith.
True
and Adam,
Faith.
will you join us for that when we have the book club?
Goddamn right I will.
All right, let's do it.
Awesome. Yeah. Sweet. All right. Hey, let's come back on the After Dark. Adam, thank you so much. We'll put a link to your Twitter handle in the show notes. The great Adam Lehrer.
All right. Thanks, guys.